Well, good day to you. It is August the 23rd, 2025, and I hope you're having a wonderful day wherever you are. My name is Gary Willing. I want to welcome you to SOP Save Our Planet, and I want to do two things before we get going. I do think that the biggest takeaway that you can get from any one of my videos, if you're interested in wanting to know more about Maitreya and the Masters of Wisdom, if you're wanting to see if this information is true for you, to do a little digging, do a little investigation. Check out some of the information on some of the websites that I provided links for in the description portion of every one of these videos to get wonderful free background information about what I'm talking about here. If you go to the Share International site, I do recommend checking that site out first because you get the best background information there than you can anywhere else. So hopefully you'll check it out. The second thing is, if you want to join the discussion, let me know what you think. Post a comment. If you have a question you want to ask me, post your question in the comments section. Or you can email me, search for signs at mail.com. And I also want to thank everybody who commented since the last time I put a video up. They were wonderfully encouraging. I really do appreciate it. First comment, Ben, te amo. So I just want to share a little story about the phrase te amo. Now, if you're not familiar with what that means, that's Spanish for I love you. And if you're not familiar with who Ben was, this person is talking about Benjamin Creme. So I'll talk about that too. But anyway, real quick. A few Valentine's days ago, I was running a little late to getting my gifts for my wife for Valentine's Day. So I went to the store and got the card, got the gifts and those kind of things, and I got the flowers, and then I went to the section that had the balloons, and all the balloons were gone except for the ones that said te amo. Ask me if my wife speaks Spanish. No, she does not. But I bought a balloon that said te amo anyway, because she always, if I forget the balloons, it's always, well, where's the balloon? So anyway, I got the balloon and put the flowers out, got the gifts out, and she comes home and she goes, what's te amo? I said, baby, it's Spanish for I love you, right? I was so thoughtful in giving you these balloons, right? And she was like, yeah, no. So it's becoming this running joke every Valentine's Day to give her a balloon that says te amo. But anyway, no, thank you very much for the comment. I've been around this information for a while, and I knew Ben for a long time. And I also knew that as long as this kept going on, and to where the point where we haven't really seen and recognized Maitreya on TV, I knew that, Ben wasn't going to live forever. And I was perhaps hoping that there would be this exciting conclusion to at least the reemergence part of Maitreya coming out into the everyday world before Ben passed, because he had a wonderful insight into and perspective into what was going on at the time that he, was going on, whenever, right? And since he's passed, the world has just been so chaotic and crazy. And it's like you wake up every morning and it's like, oh, what just happened when I was asleep? I mean, this is crazy. And I would have loved to have gotten his perspective on things, and he was also able to ask a master questions. So it would have been great to get an up-to-date, info from these masters about what's going on and his perspective. I think it would have, he was and I'm sure people that knew him and perhaps read his books or, subscribed to Share International magazine on a monthly basis would agree with this. But he was quite an anchoring force for good, in a very chaotic time that he was alive. And there's been a lot of stuff that's happened, even when he was alive. And for him to share his perspective or the master's perspective on those things, I don't think we'll really have that kind of perspective until these masters are out known for who they are. And then we can ask them ourselves directly, just as Ben could have asked his master and that kind of thing. So perhaps then we'll get the perspective that I know for myself I just really miss, right? But Ben was a wonderful man, and he worked from sun up to sundown to get this information out there. And I think the world owes him a tremendous debt. They don't see it like that. And of course, they've denigrated him the same way they denigrated Helena Blavatsky and, all the biggies throughout time, and he doesn't have a huge following. But I think when these masters, and especially Maitreya, is out known for who they are, and his name comes out again, and people really see what he did, he'll be looked at differently, right? But anyway, I love and miss him for sure, and I appreciate the comment nonetheless. All right, moving on. Is Maitreya the Antichrist that was predicted in Revelation? Well, this is probably the single biggest question I get. And I get it quite a bit. And I don't mind answering it because I do understand people's concern, and I do understand people asking this question. And I'm going to answer it in the two ways that I normally do, but I also want to answer it in a different way because I do think that it's important to think about this question in this way too. But the simplest answer to that question, is Maitreya the Antichrist, is no, he is not. The next way to answer that question is, what is the Antichrist? Well, the Antichrist is a force, it's an energy, and it's not a person, as probably every Christian thinks that the Antichrist is. And then the other thing is that about the Antichrist is that the Antichrist has already come and gone twice throughout history. Most recently through the Axis powers during World War I and World War II. And won't come back in our lifetimes for sure. It will be another 1,000-ish, or actually 3,000 years before the Antichrist force is re-released. But it does have a purpose, and it does have a purpose for good, even though it's a nefarious, dark energy. But it clears the field. It really creates it's so that a new way of thinking and a new way and relating can occur. So if we were to go back in time before the Antichrist energy was released through Emperor Nero, which he lived during the time of when John was even writing Revelation, we think and relate to one another differently. Now, Ben always said it destroyed the Roman dispensation to allow Christianity to flourish. But even if you're not a Christian, we think totally differently than we do 2,000 years ago. The idea of and the reality of individuality did not exist as en masse throughout humanity at the time. So even though the Antichrist energy was released in that little part of the world that the Roman Empire was, it affected every part of the world. So there were people living in other parts of the world that had no idea who Nero was or the Roman Empire was, right? There are people living in Central and South America, North America, Africa, Asia and stuff that didn't know Nero, right? And weren't really perhaps affected by the Roman Empire collapsing and those kind of things. But that energy affected everybody to where we think totally differently today than we did then. And then if you look at perhaps the world had become a great deal smaller, during World War I and World War II, then kind of there was, news media and people kind of knew what was going on around the world. So they saw the effect of the Axis powers. They saw the destruction of the Nazis in Germany and so forth in Europe and the militarists in Japan and the fascists in Italy, which is what the Antichrist force was released through. So it was a different time, right? Of course, right? But if we were to go back before it was released during that time, we really think totally differently than we did then. And it's only been 150 years. It hasn't been 2,000 years. So what are we going to be like 2,000 years from now, right? So these concepts of, oneness, unity, peace, which are just words right now, we're not even really experiencing it as a humanity, will be a reality because of this Antichrist energy. So, and then like I said, it won't be re-released through our lifetime for sure. So people who are awaiting the Antichrist to come back, of course they think he's a person. Of course it's a person that thinks totally differently than them. Of course, it's every time, right? And I always bring this up now because there is a huge following of people who are starting to think that Donald Trump is the Antichrist. Do you think any one of those people voted for Donald Trump? No, of course not, right? Do you think that people that are really strong MAGA supporters are starting to think that Donald Trump is the Antichrist? Well, maybe a few of them, but not that, the group as a whole. They have no idea. They have no thought that he's the Antichrist because he is thinking and saying what they agree with, right? So when somebody looks at somebody like Maitreya and goes, he's the Antichrist. Well, I mean, of course, he's saying and he looks different and he's perhaps, has different ideas than they're thinking. Of course, right? And those people are part of the Share International group who have believed for years that he is the one awaited by all the world's religions, don't think he's the Antichrist at all. And I'm one of those people, right? So, but if you look at really, even Jesus, right? I mean, this is just, so this question probably came from somebody who practices Christianity, right? I mean, historically, they thought the same thing about Jesus. They didn't call him the Antichrist, but they thought he was a demon. They thought he was Satan, and then one of the questions was, well, you're casting out demons, so you must be a demon yourself. And Jesus very logically and very simply asked the question back to them, well, if I'm a demon, why am I casting out demons, right? That makes no sense, right? So I would say the single biggest evil on this planet is war. I mean, the damage that it does to the human psyche and the humanity as a whole, and the cost of war is just, it's catastrophic. And it's a tragedy what happens when there are wars anywhere in the world. So if Maitreya is evil and he's speaking out against an evil, that's the same thing to me as what Jesus said, well, if I'm a demon, why am I casting out demons? Right? I mean, in a way. And then for somebody who's very convinced that he is the Antichrist, would then say, as a counter argument, because I get this all the time, well, he's talking about peace, and just to kind of slip in the back door so we trust him, and then you'll see just how evil that man is. Well, then my thing would be, have you ever met him in your life? Well, of course not. Have you seen him on TV and recognized him yet? Probably not. Have you even taken the time to even read anything about what he's saying? Probably not. Because they think that the Antichrist will promise peace. I come to bring peace, Give me your allegiance and your devotion, and then there will be peace. Well, there's only one person on the world stage today that is promising peace, that's saying that he and he alone will bring about peace, and that is Donald Trump. He's the only one saying it. Maitreya has never promised peace. The only thing he's said is that humanity can bring about peace if we try the principle of sharing. Because he says, without sharing, there will be no justice. Without justice, there can be no peace. And without peace, there can be no future. If you look historically, and there's a link in the description portion of these videos that will take you to a YouTube page or the Wikipedia page that talks about the Marshall Plan. But that was the time, according to the masters, that humanity tried the principle of sharing, and it brought about goodwill amongst the nations. Plain and simple. Because the nations that participated in the Marshall Plan, none of them have attacked one another since then. So it brought about goodwill amongst those nations. It did. And those nations had been at war with one another many times up until that point. And even though it was only done for a few years and it stopped since, they have still had a goodwill relationship with one another. So there's evidence for you right there. Boom, right? But Maitreya doesn't want to be referred to as the Christ. Even though people such as myself call him the Christ and look to him as the awaited teacher, he only wants to be referred to and looked to as a teacher. That's it. So a teacher should be known by their teaching. A tree is known by its fruit. Jesus talked about that too. So if a teaching is wrong or not good, it will not work or it will be bad, right? But if a teacher is worth their weight at anything, then their teaching should help improve the life of their student in some way. In this case, the whole world for him, right? Because he's a world teacher. So if what he's saying is not true, then sharing would not bring about justice and goodwill and bring about peace. Clearly, right? So I do think that people will start to open up to the idea of who and what Maitreya is, because humanity will start to take his advice a little bit. And then they'll go, oh, okay. I can kind of get that. I don't think he's the Christ because I'm still awaiting Jesus to come back, but what he says is kind of true. But see, here's the other thing too that I want to say about all this. And I've never answered the question about Maitreya, is Maitreya the Antichrist? Or if somebody comments and says that he's the Antichrist and they're not even asking the question. I've never answered it like this, but this is something that I've been thinking about. And I'm sure that I will piss off and alienate some people who listen to this and hear this. Is first and foremost, there's nothing wrong with asking that question. Okay, and I have no problems with anybody asking that question. And I also have no problems with trying to answer a question about or a concern about Maitreya being the Antichrist repeatedly. I have no problem doing that because I do understand why somebody would say this. But I have to go back just a little over 20 years ago to help prove my point. But if you were alive back then, right after 9/11, and it didn't take long, it was just a week or so or 2 weeks, the United States government, under the Bush administration, right after 9/11, already started to draw up plans to attack two countries, Iraq and Afghanistan. And then they started to promote and have this media campaign that going into Iraq was necessary, going into Afghanistan was necessary. And they had two different reasons. You know, the Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden was in Afghanistan, so that's why they needed to go in there. And then Iraq, Saddam Hussein was starting to create weapons of mass destruction, which he denied. He said, I don't have weapons of mass destruction. Even UN inspectors went in there and said that they were no closer to developing a nuclear missile or a bomb or even be able to send it over the pole and hit the United States or whatever. They weren't any closer to doing that than they were 5, 10, 20 years prior to this, because they had been checking up on this stuff ever since the first Iraqi war, right? And yet they were saying there's weapons of mass destruction. And then there was this huge, like I said, media campaign. It was like daily, over and over, we need to go in, we need to go in, we need to go in. And the mainstream media went right along with it. And a lot of the people, even on the left, politically, right? Like the political representatives on the left, senators and so forth, and even some of the news media that's basically left-wing went right along with it too, that we need to go in Iraq, there's weapons of mass destruction, blah, 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 blah. And then there were people such as myself, and I was one person of maybe the minority of the people, but a little less of the minority of the people knew that it was wrong and immoral for the United States to go into Iraq in the way that they were doing. Why did we think that it was wrong, and yet the other side thought that it was what we needed to do? And of course, they went out, we went in there, and it did exactly what people like Ben and others, and even myself without Ben, thought that was going to happen. It was going to be a total disaster. And we were going to kill innocent civilians, millions of innocent civilians, for no reason other than they wanted the resources in that country. And the terrorists in 9/11 literally handed the United States, who always wanted to go into Iraq and pull out those resources in the way that they did, on a silver platter. And incidentally, Afghanistan has some wonderful resources too, like lithium and copper and all those kind of things that we needed as well. And so, but yet, people such as myself knew that it was immoral for us to do this. And yet in the churches, in the mainstream media, and in the far right and so forth, they thought that it was the best thing that we could do was to go in there and kill a bunch of innocent people. Well, and this is what I'm going to say that I think is going to tick a lot of people off. I think it is a simple, the problem is a lack of love is really what it is. You can't love on any level and think that attacking innocent people is morally right. You can't do that, right? And it goes back to this one verse in the Bible that I think is the most important verse to remember, and it's coming from Paul. And he said, "Owe no man anything but to love them," because when you love them, you literally cannot harm someone. You can literally not lie. You cannot lie to them. And you can't even want what they have. You can't even covet anything that they have. So all the thou shalt nots in the Ten Commandments, you literally can't do any of those things. If you truly love somebody on any level and your heart chakra is opening up just a little bit even, you can't do any of those things, right? And of course, you have moments where you maybe perhaps lose a little bit of that. But overall, as a general way of living, you can't do that. And if that is happening in front of you, you see the injustice in those things. So the people that saw the injustice in going into something like Iraq, I think their heart chakra was starting to open up a little bit, where they're like, we can't do this. You know what I'm saying? And those people who had the ideal of love, had the ideal of Jesus's Christianity and the ideal of those kind of things, but lacked the love, fell right into it. Because it was a nefarious plan. It was a plan that was perpetrated by the forces of evil to do what the Bush administration did. Plain and simple. And so and it's not just Maitreya, but when others in the public eye talk about the need for more justice, the need to bring about universal health care, those people with a lack of love, who have a financial, self-interest to not do it, go out on these media campaigns and call it communism, call it evil, call it socialism. Oh my God, that's the worst thing that could ever possibly happen, is socialism. And I think the people that are lacking love at this moment in time are able to be duped in that way. And those people that have a little bit of a modicum of love aren't duped in that way. And so that's why it says in the Bible too, woe are those who see good as evil and evil good. You can't see good as evil and evil good if you love. Can't do it. It's impossible. You see the good in the good. You see the evil in the evil. You can't mix them up. You know what I'm saying? You can't do it. Intellectually, you can do it if you don't have that love. And I do think the gift of Maitreya to humanity is his love will open up the hearts of humanity. And then we'll see, oh my gosh, yes, the best thing that we could do is bring about justice. The best thing that we could do is end all wars forever. Ever. And then the best thing to do is to end hunger. Absolutely the best thing to do. But yet, we're living in a world where there's this lack of love. So people can see that for themselves, and they are clearly seeing this, and they see this as true for them, right? But there is no truth to this, is that ending hunger is an evil. You know what I'm saying? Giving people health care that can't afford it, an evil. They see it as evil. And that's why they fight tooth and nail for a system that doesn't even support them. But when Maitreya starts to speak, as Ben's master so eloquently put one time, he'll say the same words that we've all heard before. But because of who and what he is, it will open the hearts of humanity just enough to where they'll start to understand it. They'll start to see the good in the good, and then start to see the evil in the evil more, right? And we won't get them conflated. You know what I'm saying? We won't get them confused. It won't get mixed up. And then we will start to change the world in the way that we do. I do think that that's the problem, is a lack of love. I love you guys. Thank you very much for the comment. And I really do appreciate the question, and hopefully you understand that I really do appreciate the question. I love you guys very much. Take care and enjoy the rest of your day. Have a wonderful day. Remember to take action and help SOP save our planet. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to talking to you again in future videos.